Hello, and welcome back to Pathfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is part of a series I am producing covering the various deities in the Pathfinder role-playing game and its setting, the world of Golarion. Last time, I thought I had concluded my coverage of the core 20 deities with Caden Kalian, the god of drink, freedom, and adventure. But Paizo recently announced that someone new will be stepping into the Core 20 later this year with the War of Immortals adventure path and the associated Divine Mysteries sourcebook. So, today I will be concluding my coverage of the core deities with one of my absolute favorite characters in all of Pathfinder, Arazni, the Unyielding, former Herald of Eredin, former Queen of Geb, and Goddess of Dignity, the Abused, and Unwilling Undeath. Also, major spoilers for the Tyrant's Grasp adventure path from 1st edition. Seriously, if you are planning to play that campaign, stop the video now unless you do not care about spoilers. Also, content warning. Arazni's story is a highly compelling tale of an abuse survivor regaining control of her life. Arazni suffered a great many abuses at the hands of multiple men, ranging from neglect, to physical and emotional abuse, to torture and humiliation, to murder, forced resurrection, and bodily mutilation. Her bodily autonomy was violated innumerable times over the course of centuries, an experience which Arazni herself has compared to rape. While sexual assault is, thankfully, never made explicit, the undertones and parallels to the subject are certainly intentional on the part of the writers. If any of these topics make you uncomfortable, I encourage you to stop this video and come back for the next one. And don't forget to bring any content limits you have up to your GM and fellow players. Everyone should feel comfortable at the table, and the first step to that is healthy communication. Arazni was once a mortal woman, but ascended to full divinity as a result of her own actions. Though she herself is quite old, having been born prior to the ascension of Eredin, her ascension is an extremely recent event. While she provided deific powers to her followers as a demigoddess for centuries, it wasn't until 4719, less than 10 years ago at time of recording, that she ascended to true godhood. Throughout her existence, Arazni has gone by many names and titles, including the Red Crusader, the Harlot Queen, the Lich Queen, the Red Queen, and the Unyielding. She is a remarkably self-interested deity, with a small number of followers. She is extremely closely tied to the Inner Sphere, and specifically to the Inner Sea region of Golarion. She is known for her vengefulness and resilience in the face of adversity. Outside of her formal clergy, who are already extremely few and far between, she is worshipped primarily by the abused, by unwilling undead, and by some crusaders against the Whispering Tyrant. In modern times, Arazni is depicted as a gray-skinned woman with dark hair garbed in adventuring gear and wearing a hooded green cloak. She is often shown wielding a rapier, and might be surrounded by the petals of the lotus flower. She is sometimes depicted with an intense, hateful gaze. Her gray pallor is due to her nature as an undead creature, and some depictions include a scar running down her neck and chest. I should clarify that Arazni's appearance changes significantly as her story progresses. Arazni has no known deific realm in the inner or outer spheres. She has close ties to the nation of Geb in Garund, but almost certainly spends no time there. Since she has no known alliances among her fellow gods, it seems unlikely she is crashing with another deity. In all likelihood, she is probably roaming the inner and outer spheres pursuing her own goals, without a specific home. Followers of Arazni, called Araznians, are fairly rare. The Red Queen is generally uninterested in followers who venerate her, but she does take a sort of vindictive pleasure in having devout followers, taking it as a sign of her unshakable resilience. She grants power specifically to those followers who are suffering abuse, but doing what they can to bear it with pride. Other followers who receive her blessings are those facing off against her foes, most commonly the Whispering Tyrant. Devout followers are expected to live lives of dignity and defiance in the face of adversity. They are instructed to take pride in themselves and to never forget those who wrong them. Temples and shrines to Arazni are extremely uncommon in the Age of Lost Omens, due to her low number of followers. Her major temples and shrines are likely holdovers from the earlier periods in her life. I will discuss these in greater detail once I get to her history. In modern times, small shrines might be created by crusaders in the Gravelands to honor their patron deity. These shrines likely vary significantly in design based on the preferences of the follower who created it. Shrines placed in public places might be intended to be seen by the forces of the Whispering Tyrant, and will likely be intended to instill fear, and so might incorporate bright lotus petals, Arazni's holy symbol, and trophies collected from fallen members of the Tyrant's forces. Arazni has no specific holy text, and followers in the Age of Lost Omens are reliant on her broad edicts to determine her will. That said, multiple writings and quotes exist to this day which can be attributed to her, though these aren't really considered holy or even instructive by her followers anymore. During her time as the Queen of Geb, she issued many rulings and wrote many laws which still exist. These are not considered indicative of her beliefs since her ascension, but are still a good indication of her political acumen and skill in rulership. Arazni began her existence not as a god or even a demigod, but as a mortal human woman. Probably born sometime between -1550 and -1520 AR in the Arcadian nation of Xapatl, in the capital city of Guharaldi, Arazni grew into a powerful mage and scholar. She made careful study of the ley lines in Xapatl, then moved on to studying the veins of creation, powerful lines of magical energy running from the mystical Kumaru tree on Tumbaha Mountain. During these studies, she made the acquaintance of Erodin, the last Aslanti. This was prior to Erodin's ascension, and the pair treated one another as respected colleagues and research partners. The pair set out across Arcadia, earning reputations as heroes. They returned years later, after vanquishing several powerful foes, and earned unlimited access to the Kumaru tree. The pair continued their research for several more years, until Arazni grew content with her knowledge. She bid farewell to Erodin, and the pair went their separate ways, Arazni setting out to continue improving life in Arcadia, and Erodin remaining behind to continue his studies. This would be the last time they would interact as mortals. Arazni continued her adventuring until -1471 AR, when she and the terrible monster Tlochach killed one another in mortal combat. Her essence then passed into the River of Souls, where she was eventually judged by Pharasma herself, and sent to the afterlife in Nirvana, where she went on to manifest as an astral deva, a type of angel. Her story would have ended there, were it not for the continued involvement of Erodin. After his ascension, Erodin wandered the outer sphere, acquainting himself with his fellow deities. During this exploration, he rediscovered his friend Arazni in her new form. Remembering their friendship, Erodin asked her to involve herself in the affairs of Golarion once more. Arazni accepted, taking the last Aslanti up on his offer and becoming his herald, taking on the title of the Red Crusader. Arazni served as Erodin's herald for centuries, eventually attaining even greater power and earning demigod status, granting her the ability to provide divine magic to clerics and champions. It is unclear if she served Erodin when he first defeated Tar-Baphon, but what is clear is that she served for a long time before the Whispering Tyrant rose again in his lich form. When the Shining Crusade rose up to challenge the armies of the Whispering Tyrant, Erodin refused to aid in their conflict. The Knights of Ozem, an order of warriors led by the mortal hero Iomide, took up a position of prominence in the crusade. Iomide herself was a paladin of Arazni. To aid in their efforts against the tyrant, the Knights of Ozem summoned Arazni, begging for her aid. Arazni agreed to help, but the knights were unwilling to simply take her at her word. In the face of Tar-Baphon's incredible magic, the knights saw fit to bind Arazni with powerful magic of their own, so she might never be turned against them. Arazni still consented to fight against the tyrant, but this binding magic planted the seeds of doubt deep within her heart. During this time, temples and shrines to Arazni were common. As the patron saint of the crusade, Arazni attracted a large number of clerics and champions. Arazni championed the crusade until she came to face the Whispering Tyrant himself. Arazni bravely stood against the tyrant, hurling her magic against his defenses, but it wasn't enough. Tar-Baphon defeated Arazni, then tortured and mutilated her body until finally slaying her and displaying her ruined form to the horrified Knights of Ozem. At this point, Arazni's soul once again departed the inner sphere. The entire crusade was driven back by this tremendous defeat, until Iomide, still a human, rallied her followers. It wasn't until the Battle of the Three Sorrows, where Iomide slew Erumhel, one of Tar-Baphon's mightiest lieutenants, that the Knights of Ozem were able to recover Arazni's corpse. After the imprisonment of Tar-Baphon in Gallowspire, the knights finally interred the Red Crusader in their fortress, in the town which would come to be known as Vigil. This, too, might have been the end of Arazni's story, were it not for the intervention of another powerful wizard. Less than a century later, after Tar-Baphon's imprisonment, the Knights of Ozem had grown tired of their more peaceful existence guarding against the potential return of the Whispering Tyrant. Desperate to reclaim some of the Order's foregone glory, Commander Gladius Barrenmore redirected the Knights' focus toward the undead nation of Geb. Barrenmore quickly planned a mission for 6 powerful knights, including his own grandson. These 6 knights soon set out for Geb. This invasion proved to be a disaster. The knights were killed quickly, but the attempted mission managed to draw the attention and annoyance of Geb himself. Offended by the arrogance of the Knights of Ozem, Geb concocted a plan. He resurrected the 6 knights as grave knights, then sent them back to Lastwall on a mission of retribution. The resurrected knights broke into Arazni's tomb and stole her corpse, bringing it back to their master in Geb. The Knights of Ozem refused to take this lying down, however, and launched a dedicated counterattack to recover their patron saint's body. They invaded Geb a year later and made it all the way to Mekatar, the capital, where they made a horrifying discovery. Arazni was back, reanimated in a terrible ritual by Geb himself and given the form of a powerful lich. Her capacity for kindness and mercy was gone, replaced by burning hatred. She now served Geb as his queen, following his commands with exactness. In the face of this unimaginable horror, the Knights of Ozem were driven back, abandoning the nation of Geb to its ghost king, and leaving Arazni to her unimaginable fate. Geb had been very thoughtful in his machinations surrounding Arazni. He had spent a year and a day on the ritual to coax her soul back from the afterlife, and he had no intention of simply allowing her to escape his clutches. He subtly manipulated her mind and emotions, feeding her righteous fury and twisting it into an all-consuming anger. The seed of doubt, planted when the Knights of Ozem bound her during the Shining Crusade, now took root and blossomed into outrage. Geb was now only one of many targets for Arazni's wrath, but he still maintained direct control over Arazni via her soul cage. Sometimes referred to as a phylactery, a soul cage is the defining feature of a lich, and contains the living soul of the being. Unless the soul cage is destroyed, a lich is functionally immortal. Geb himself was the only one who knew the location of Arazni's soul cage, and this, combined with the magics he had imbued into her resurrection ritual, allowed him to supersede control of her body, and to a lesser extent her will. As a final measure of security, Geb assigned the 6 grave knights who had stolen Arazni's corpse to her personal guard. Ostensibly her bodyguards, the grave knights, now dubbed the Council Libertine, instead served as watchers over Arazni. The Lich Queen had been carefully conditioned by Geb to be unable to harm these knights, so she was entirely unable to resist them whenever they took action against her. These knights were more than willing to use force against Arazni whenever she made attempts at breaking free of her imprisonment. They could kill her with impunity, knowing she would simply regenerate in Geb due to the nature of her soul cage. In case you were curious, Arazni's opinion on her imprisonment is made exceptionally clear. She has unambiguously referred to Geb as a rapist for his treatment of her body and mind. She sought eternally to free herself from his clutches. Geb's bonds to her were strong, however, and Arazni was forced to serve as his queen for centuries. Arazni was, effectively, the chief executive of Geb for over 800 years. The Wizard King Geb himself was entirely uninterested in managing the affairs of his kingdom, and Arazni proved exceptionally capable in the field of leadership. During this period, Arazni was sometimes worshipped as a demigoddess of undeath. While her church was never particularly widespread, it did contribute to her political power. It also had contributed to her worsening reputation outside of Geb. She soon became known as the Harlot Queen throughout the entire Inner Sea region, and among the Knights of Ozem, rumors spread that the Council Libertine served as her vile harem. A victim of assault being shamed for circumstances outside of her control? I wonder if there are any tragic parallels to the real world today. During this time, Arazni constantly hoped that her old friend Aroden would free her from her torturous imprisonment. As the centuries passed, however, it became clear that Aroden was entirely unwilling to take action to save her. This dying hope finally came to an end in 4606 AR with the death of Aroden. Still, Arazni never stopped seeking a path toward her freedom, and finally, in 4719 AR, an opportunity presented itself. Once again, major spoilers for the Tyrant's Grasp adventure path. Leading up to 4719, Arazni began to experience emotions from someone else, and to hear a voice in her head. She figured out that this voice belonged to her old enemy, Tar-Baphon, the Whispering Tyrant. By listening to the voice in her head, Arazni learned that the tyrant was close to freeing himself. Curious to witness the magics her enemy had wrought to end his imprisonment, Arazni slipped free of the Council Libertine and traveled to Lastwall. She arrived just in time to witness the tyrant's first use of his new superweapon, a mixed blast of positive and negative energy dubbed the Radiant Fire. This surge of magic destroyed Arazni's body, but as she inevitably reformed in Geb, she realized that the tyrant's new weapon might just be potent enough to break her connection to her soul cage. With this new hope smoldering within her, she wove new magical wards about herself, then set out again for Lastwall, with the Council Libertine in hot pursuit. Arazni arrived in the town of Rosler's Coffer to observe the aftermath of a blast of radiant fire. Her arrival coincided with the emergence of several souls from the Boneyard back into the universe. These were the player characters of Tyrant's Grasp. Arazni recognized something about the adventurer's souls that was broken, though she could not pin down exactly what. Seeing these adventurers as tools she could use, Arazni guided them to the town of Vigil. The adventurers eventually faced and defeated several members of the Council Libertine, freeing Arazni to pursue her plans more openly. Arazni continued to observe their progress, but didn't reveal herself again until the adventurers were nearly forced to confront the Whispering Tyrant directly. At this point, Arazni put her plan into motion. She confronted Tar-Baphon in person, forcing him to test his magic against her own. The Lich Queen stood proud and tall against her old enemy, holding him back until he felt compelled to loose the radiant fire once more. As Tar-Baphon unleashed the full might of his superweapon, Arazni allowed herself to be consumed. The wards she had placed upon her body served not to protect her, but to further enhance the radiant fire, creating a feedback loop which amplified the weapon's destructive power. Arazni knew not if she would be freed from her bondage or simply be permanently destroyed, soul and all, and she didn't care. The results of her plan were far more than she could have ever hoped for. Arazni rose again as the Unyielding, a full goddess. Still undead, she found her connection to her soul cage completely shattered. She was free. Or, at least, free of Geb's direct control. She was still a slave to her anger and hate. She took up patronage of those who follow a similar path to her own, the abused, the proud, and the undead who did not seek their current state of existence. She remains a spiteful, vengeful goddess to this day, but her bond with the adventurers who contributed to her freedom has served to soften her mood slightly. While she remains largely private after her ascension and doesn't actively seek or recruit followers, Arazni has seen fit to secretly empower a specific group of champions, the Crimson Reclaimers of the Knights of Lastwall, led by Clarith Iomidar. The Crimson Reclaimers are a violent sect among the Knights, dedicated to active offensive engagement with the forces of the Whispering Tyrant. They engage in rescue and espionage missions behind enemy lines in the Gravelands, and readily accept assassination missions targeting the Tyrant's lieutenants. Each member of the Crimson Reclaimers has sworn the Crimson Oath, a magical promise to pursue the defeat of Tar-Baphon. We swear with voices cold as death, while yet we stand and yet draw breath. We shall not let the dead endure, nor let them taint our land's verdure. We shall not falter, shall not rout, but cut them down and burn them out. We swear on Vigil's shattered walls, our crimson oath, the tyrant falls. Paizo has confirmed that Arazni is the source of power behind this oath, providing the magic which infuses the sworn knights and fills them with resignation and determination. Whispers among the knights claim that all those who have sworn the Crimson Oath can recognize one another at a glance, negating any need for an official sigil or crest to indicate membership. Arazni refuses to publicly take credit for the oath's origins, but her followers can certainly be found among the Reclaimers. Interestingly, followers of other gods seem to have been able to swear the Crimson Oath without disrupting their connection to their own deities. This extends even to the act of swearing the oath itself. Devout followers of gods friendly to the Knights of Lastwall, such as Vildeus or Iomide, have been known to add lines to the end of the oath referencing their divine patrons. This has had no negative impact on the power the oath grants to that person, implying that Arazni cares little if the Reclaimers follow other gods, so long as they remain committed to destroying the tyrant. Arazni is among the newest gods in the Great Beyond. She has had relatively little time to establish relationships with her fellow divinities. Still, Paizo has provided some insight into her opinions on her fellow gods. Her most complicated relationship is that which she maintains with Iomide. Arazni's twisted hatred of the Knights of Ozem, fed by Geb during her resurrection, extends to some degree to her former champion, Iomide. She also hates Iomide for having usurped her as Eredin's herald. And yet, she retains a certain pride in Iomide for having completed the Shining Crusade, and for having endured her many trials. While the two goddesses will likely never consider each other friends, they are certainly united in their hatred of Tar-Baphon, and their desire to see him destroyed. Arazni's relationship with Eredin, or at least with his memory, is far less complicated. The Unyielding despises her former friend, and spits on his name. She remembers clearly the centuries she suffered under Geb's hands, and knows Eredin could have freed her at any time, but chose not to. Personally, I think Eredin is very lucky to have died, because I would hate to see the vengeance Arazni would cook up for him were he still alive. Arazni has no confirmed positive relationships with her fellow gods, but she does admire and relate to several of her fellows. Lamashtu began her existence as a demon lord rather than a goddess, and clawed her way to power. Arazni sees parallels to the Mother of Monsters in the way she empowered herself into godhood to throw off Geb's control. Girona, the Hag Queen, encourages her followers to hold on to their hatred born from abuses they suffered, which is a belief that Arazni herself shares. Ericura, wife of the archdevil Dispater, Lord of the Second, serves as her husband's queen in a realm which is not her own, mirroring Arazni's role as the Queen of Geb. While the Unyielding might not ally herself with these goddesses, she considers aspects of their lives and teachings worth replicating or learning from. Now, Arazni has had relatively little written about her since her ascension, so she, or at least her followers, likely have relationships with other deities and their followers which simply haven't been explored yet. Not to engage in rampant speculation, but there are a few relationships which seem entirely reasonable to assume. Callistria's devotion to vengeance seems to be something Arazni and her followers might easily relate to. Arazni is still strongly motivated to avenge the wrongs done to her by Geb, Tar-Baphon, and others. The teachings of other deities of vengeance, such as Drangvit of the Dwarven pantheon, might also have some overlap with Arazni's beliefs. Followers of these deities focused on vengeance will likely find substantial common ground with followers of Arazni, and they will likely be able to work well together. As a goddess of unwilling undeath, it is reasonable to assume that Arazni is opposed to Zura, the demon lord of vampires, and Cabriri, the demon lord of ghouls. Unlike other gods of undeath like Urgathoa, these two demon lords are directly responsible for the creation of innumerable vampires and ghouls who had unlife forced upon them by others. As such, Arazni would likely consider them and their followers her enemies. While some of the gods of Lastwall might be willing to work with followers of Arazni, the most zealous among them, such as followers of Vildeus or Regathiel, might not be willing to compromise their beliefs to work alongside Arazni, who is still unequivocally evil. This likely contributes to the unease among the Knights of Lastwall regarding the Crimson Reclaimers, though more than a few followers of Vildeus and Regathiel count themselves among the Reclaimers' ranks. Finally, Arazni is notable among the gods in that she has very strong connections to multiple mortals on Golarion. She actively works against the Whispering Tyrant Tar-Baphon. Her simmering hatred for the Lich who slew and humiliated her remains, even after nearly 1,000 years. She has secretly empowered the Crimson Reclaimer branch of the Knights of Lastwall using the Crimson Oath, encouraging their violent fanaticism and opposition to the tyrant's forces. Arazni also seeks vengeance upon the Ghost King Geb, who has been forced to take a more direct role in his nation's governance in the Lich Queen's absence. While she has been freed from the direct control imposed by her soul cage, she still considers it a valuable possession, and yearns to recover it from Geb's clutches. Additionally, she seeks to destroy the Wizard King's many accomplishments, and inflict upon him even a portion of the suffering he caused her. For players who might be interested in playing characters who follow Arazni, here are a few useful details. First and foremost, Arazni has a complicated relationship with her followers. She is sickened by the thought of mortals venerating what she has become. Simultaneously, she takes immense pride in her resilience, and understands why followers in similar difficult circumstances might reach out to her for strength. She also sees having followers as a kind of vengeance upon those who defeated or subjugated her in the past, and recognizes their value in accomplishing her goals on Golarion. The few followers to whom she does grant power are discouraged from seeking more information on her motivations, as Arazni has become deeply private since her ascension. Any clerics who do seek to understand her more deeply are likely to find their powers cut off permanently. For those using the alignment rules, Arazni is a neutral evil deity. She accepts clerics of any morally neutral alignment, plus neutral evil alignment and chaotic good alignment. Her edicts are to act with dignity, to do whatever it takes to survive, and to despise and never forgive those who hurt you. Conversely, to create unwilling undead, or to insult Arazni herself, are both anathema to Arazni. Notably, Arazni considers her former title, the Harlot Queen, to be a dire insult, so followers will never use that term to describe her, instead referring to her as the Unyielding, or sometimes the Red Queen. Her domains are confidence, freedom, pain, and protection, and she has the alternate domain of sorrow as well. Arazni's listed sacred colors are gray and red, though it's worth noting that these might be a holdover from her days as the Red Crusader, as she herself no longer dresses in these colors in common depictions. Still, Some followers might choose to take up her colors as a recollection of her days as the Red Crusader, possibly by donning a flowing red cloak. More commonly, Arazni's followers might simply carry her holy symbol, a rapier overlaid on a lotus blossom, on their person. Among the Crimson Reclaimers, clothing emphasizes practicality, even among Arazni's most devoted followers. Action against Arazni's enemies, particularly Tar-Bathon in the Gravelands, requires every advantage and precaution. Knights Reclamant will often dress in pragmatic clothing, plain unadorned armor, pelts and textiles intended to aid in camouflage, or civilian clothing meant to aid in non-detection during undercover operations. Arazni's favored weapon is the rapier, though, similar to her sacred colors, she has no requirements that her followers use this weapon over others. Still, many followers might gravitate towards rapiers and other weapons in the sword group. This might be due to the prevalence of such weapons in areas where the Shining Crusade was once active, or it could be due to swords having long been associated with nobility and pride, which might be associated with Arazni's command to live with dignity. Arazni's favored animal is the scarab beetle, likely due to her association with death and undeath. Followers active in Geb might choose carrion-eating animals like rats, vultures, or ravens as familiars in order to blend in. In the Gravelands, followers might instead choose bears, wolves, or hawks from among the local fauna to serve as scouts and defenders against the undead. Mindless undead often ignore animals entirely, so a trained beast could easily serve as a vigilant watcher or spy. Arazni has very few followers, and her church doesn't really exist as an organized entity. As such, followers can be members of practically any class. Followers are likely most active in Geb and the Gravelands. In Geb, followers will likely function as partisans, spies, resistance fighters, assassins, and insurgents. Therefore, they might be members of the rogue, ranger, or investigator classes, or take feats from the assassin, alter ego, or vigilante archetypes. Due to the proximity of Alkenstar, gunslingers and inventors are likely to be found among the faithful here as well, though the attention-grabbing nature of these classes might run counter to the faith's need for stealth. In the Gravelands and around the Eye of Dread, followers likely engage in more open warfare. Rangers will excel in the rugged terrain of the region, and fighters or spirit instinct barbarians will perform well against the forces of the Whispering Tyrant, as might Beastmasters or Marshals. The Crimson Reclaimer archetype might be common in this region as well, as might any archetype or class found among the Knights of Lastwall. In both Geb and the Gravelands, followers might take feats from the Undead Slayer, Hallowed Necromancer, or Exorcist archetypes, and any class or archetype which excels at targeting specific enemies, like the Thaumaturge, will perform well. Clerics and champions of Arazni are zealous in their beliefs, and can be found anywhere her faith is active. Players might draw inspiration from Arazni's status as an undead being who opposes other undead beings. Undead bloodline sorcerers, Bones mystery oracles, and undead eidolon summoners might all play on this theme. As diverse as the class makeup of Arazni's faithful is, the ancestry makeup is likely just as diverse, or at least has the potential to be. In Geb, any of the ancestries common to the Impossible Lands might be found among her faithful, though the local ethnicities of humans, elves, halflings, and dwarves will likely be the most common. In the Gravelands, any of the ancestries found among the knights, from sprites to orcs, might be drawn to Arazni's faith. Notably, Arazni is willing to accept undead followers as well, so skeletons, ghosts, and others might be found among her faithful. From a roleplay perspective, vampires and ghouls could very easily play into Arazni's domain over unwilling undeath. Devout followers of Arazni are almost certainly individuals who have suffered at the hands of others. They have likely endured traumatic experiences and come out with their heads held high. Followers of Arazni are likely vicious pragmatists, and might struggle with the question of if the ends justify the means. they are probably devoted to destroying Arazni's enemies, most commonly Geb or Tar-Baphon, but might instead focus on killing other abusers throughout the universe. Araznians will typically carry themselves with pride and dignity, though they will never hesitate to do whatever is necessary to survive. One additional point of note: due to her complex and dynamic history on Golarion, Arazni has attracted a diverse array of followers in the last millennium. During her time as the Red Crusader, her followers were the Knights of Ozem and their fellow Crusaders, warriors who held themselves to high ideals and stood against evil. As Geb's Lich Queen, Arazni was worshipped as a demigoddess and had a small following in the nation of Geb. Clerics of Arazni were skilled government administrators, since she had diminished in power to the point where she was unable to provide divine magic to her followers. I bring all of this up to clarify that none, or at least very, very few, of Arazni's faithful who worshipped her in her previous iterations received divine power from her since her ascension. The Unyielding scoffs at those who still worship the Red Crusader, and those who worship the Lich Queen are actively insulting her by assuming the version of herself which was subservient to Geb was worthy of worship. The only historical followers who might still receive power from Arazni are those who have evolved alongside her. A Knight of Ozem, now Lastwall, who has witnessed the destruction of Lastwall at Tar-Baphon's hand, might become disillusioned and find herself shifting from reverence of the Red Crusader to the more jaded teachings of the Unyielding. Such a follower might have once been a member of the Shining Sentinels among the Knights, and may find themselves joining up with the Crimson Reclaimers as an expression of their more aggressive worldview. An undead former follower in Geb might not have been raised to unlife by their own choosing. Such a character might have served as an administrator within Arazni's church, then might have been inspired by the Lich Queen's successful attempt to free herself of Geb's claws. Such a follower might attempt to track down the necromancer or undead who raised them and seek revenge, before likely seeking to escape Geb's tyranny. For GMs looking to integrate Arazni and her followers into a campaign, here are some ideas. Arazni's current herald is unknown, as are her divine servitors. As a fairly new goddess, it's entirely possible she simply hasn't had a chance to fill these roles yet. Arazni's lack of a permanent home might contribute to this absence of divine followers as well. Rather than seeing this as a hindrance for GMs, I think this is a strength, from a storytelling perspective. Arazni is more likely to directly involve herself with PCs in order to convey her will. While her divine providence has not been officially presented by Paizo, to my knowledge, I think she might show her approval only sparingly. It might take the form of blooming lotus flowers, or a sudden numbing of a follower's pains. Her disfavor is something she is likely to show more frequently, and might take the form of bruises which take a long time to heal, a lasting sense of shame, or blood appearing on freshly drawn weapons. As for who Arazni might appoint to be her herald, my guess would probably be Ileana Testake, at least if I'm limiting it to NPCs we know from the currently released books. Ileana is, much like Arazni herself, an unwilling undead, having been turned into a vampire in recent years. She is an active member of the Knights of Lastwall, and therefore is actively fighting Arazni's greatest enemy, Tar-Baphon. It might be fun to run a campaign in the Gravelands where Ileana's appointment to the position of Arazni's herald is something the PCs can witness, or even enable. Arazni's particular need for privacy might even result in Ileana becoming her herald, then still being allowed to remain in the Gravelands, only receiving visions and power from the Unyielding when absolutely necessary. In addition to Ileana, another potential candidate for the position of Arazni's herald is Clarith Iomidar, the leader of the Crimson Reclaimers, and the first person to swear the Crimson Oath. Personally, I think choosing Clarith is a bit too obvious, which is why I think it will be Ileana. Please note, once Arazni takes her place in the Core 20 in the Pantheon, I fully expect that she will have a permanent home in the Outer Sphere, a designated herald, and a race of outsiders who serve as her divine servitors. As far as how Arazni and her followers might be integrated thematically into a campaign or adventure, that part's easy. Unlike most gods, Arazni has some serious beef with mortals, or at least non-gods, currently active on Golarion. In the Gravelands, Tar-Bathon and his lieutenants are a seemingly insurmountable threat, perfect for a long-term campaign, or even one-off adventures involving Arazni's followers. The Knights of Lastwall book provides plenty of potential plot hooks involving the tyrant's followers. The Fortress of Vigil is currently ruled over by the Wyrmwraith Grimquill, an undead creature with no loyalties to the tyrant himself. The Urgathoan priestess Nurina has taken up residence in Castle Everstand, a fortress created by a deck of many things, and she is attempting to reverse engineer the magic which created the castle. The village of Arwyll Stead is apparently still controlled by the living, but the denizens remain suspiciously cheerful, and travelers have been disappearing in the village at an alarming rate. On top of all of this, the Crimson Reclaimers are constantly seeking ways to assassinate Tar-Bathon's lieutenants, from Lysithea Sorrowscythe, the Urgathoan Harbinger, to Princess Mizoivel and her vampire Lashunta bodyguards. The Church of Arazni might reasonably be involved in any or all of these potential plots, and are likely instigators in more than a few of them. These quests and adventures will likely involve followers of multiple deities, from Pharasma to Iomedae to Regathiel, so Arazni's current social status among the gods is likely to lead to substantial social and political tension for PCs to navigate. Additionally, the Gravelands house, or at least probably house, several artifacts important to the Unyielding, the Bloodstones of Arazni. When Arazni was raised as a lich, Geb removed 4 organs from her body: her heart, her liver, her intestines, and her spleen. He placed these items in special canoptic jars, sealing away substantial portions of the Red Crusader's divine power to protect himself from her wrath. These jars, and the power they contained, became known as the Bloodstones of Arazni. During the raid by the Knights of Ozem which attempted to recover Arazni's body from Geb, the Knights managed to collect the Bloodstones and bring them back to Lastwall. In the years since, the locations of the Bloodstones were lost. Each stone still contains a large portion of Arazni's former power. If she were to recover them, she would likely become substantially more powerful as a goddess. Conversely, if her enemies were to recover them, they might be able to turn the power of the stones against her. One of the Bloodstones was found during the events of Tyrant's Grasp, but the ultimate fate of this artifact is unknown. Ghost King Geb is Arazni's other great enemy, and she and her followers would be more than happy to see him brought low. Agents of Arazni might be involved in escalating tensions with Nex, in the hopes that the two nations might go to war, weakening the Ghost King's power base. They might also align with followers of Pharasma to hunt down and assassinate Geb's most powerful bloodlords, or perhaps the heads of the churches of Zura and Cabriri within Geb. Geb himself also possesses something of tremendous importance to Arazni, her soul cage. Geb is the only one who knows where the soul cage resides, and Arazni would love little more than to see it taken from him. While Arazni is freed from the control the soul cage once imposed, it still likely holds some esoteric connection to her, and recovering it might provide her with additional deific power. Alternatively, Geb is an impossibly intelligent legendary wizard, and might be able to reforge the connection between Arazni and her cage. This might force Arazni's hand, and push her to command her followers to directly and immediately confront Geb. Alright, so that's it. That's Arazni, the Unyielding. She is a tremendously dynamic and dramatic character, and probably the best written of Paizo's gods. Her story is both tragic and inspiring, and touches on several themes which, when handled carefully, can lead to a rich and enthralling story. This is by far my longest video yet, and that is due in no small part to how well Paizo has handled this character. So, that actually concludes my coverage of the Core 20. Of course, there will be a lot of updates to the deific lore after the War of Immortals and Divine Mysteries books are published, so I'm sure I will be back after that with a lore update. And to be clear, I am definitely not done covering the gods of Pathfinder. I have barely scratched the surface of Paizo's incredible pantheon. I'll be back with more videos in the future, but for now I'm taking a break. This Core 20 project took me just over a year to put together, so I'm going to kick back for a bit. When I do come back, I want to dig deeper into the gods of the Inner Sea and beyond, and after a video topic this heavy, I think I deserve something fun. So, up next, after my break, will be one of my favorite minor deities in the setting, Besmara, goddess of piracy, sea monsters, and the sea. Yo ho ho, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, consider checking out my rules supplement Expanded Ancestries on Pathfinder Infinite. It adds over 200 new ancestry feats to the game, spread among each of the ancestries not covered by the Pathfinder 2e remaster. And be sure to like and subscribe to see more videos like this.